Can you help us understand, Lynn, what did you do that was so particularly remarkable, groundbreaking for its time?
So at that time period, there was not a lot of interest in sport climbing by a lot of the traditionalists here in this country. When I went to France and discovered the competitions and the limestone, my whole world opened up because it was something I really enjoyed. And I knew that it was kind of controversial in America. So one of the first cliffs that was developed with bolts was in Smith Rocks. And when we say old school crag, it has a lot of meaning, but what it means in the case of Smith Rocks is they tried to make the bolts really far apart so that they were a little bit scary, so that the traditionalists wouldn't call you a lightweight or whatever because you had bolts. They conceived, sport climbing as something that was too safe or something. Oh yeah, that you're not risking anything. So sometimes like this one, the latest rage, you have to stand out for the first bolt and climb up a little bit just to get to the first bolt. And if you fall, it's quite a fall. It's like 35 feet to the ground, because you go down this hillside. So people now have stick clips and they, have found ways around it. But the point being here is that I discovered sport climbing, knowing that a lot of the people and the areas that I'd grown up climbing in Southern California, Yosemite, that they didn't have that same viewpoint. They didn't have that experience of knowing what you could actually do on, cutting edge level climbs. So back then, I did my first 514 in France because we didn't have 514 in America. So people didn't understand what was possible. So I feel like my experiences over there in Europe, learning how to compete on, when they call your name, you go out and compete. So you have to be ready and you have to be vulnerable and willing to put yourself on the line. You have to be willing, I don't like the word fail, but you might fall. And you have to accept that whatever you did, you tried your hardest and don't get too distracted. In fact, I was actually encouraged by the crowd clapping. It made me climb better, I think. I mean, it's nerve-wracking to be performing in front of people, but you get used to that too. So when you're on the big stage of climbing in Yosemite, you could feel nervousness about, your performance. So that I think was helpful, as well as obviously knowing how to climb hard routes. 514, like I said, the difficulty has to do with the size of the holds, the distance between the holds, and how awkward the climbing is, and overall how strenuous it is. And so I was able to combine my background as a traditionalist, as a traditional style climber, and the sport climbing, and put that together on things like the changing corners and the last pitch, which is kind of an interesting, more, physical overhanging kind of climbing. And so you have to have the ability to crack climb and rope management, all the logistics of hauling your gear and everything else. And you have to be able to climb at a high level, about 2,500 feet off the ground. The Great Roof is almost 2,000 feet off the ground. So you also have to be efficient. You can't waste energy. Even if you're strong, I've seen a lot of people they're super strong and they're actually their own worst enemy because they don't know how to relax. They'll just, they'll try too hard and then they're just pumped. They're gassed, after only a few moves. I saw that with people like, even Ben Moon, who's the inventor of the moon board. He's a super strong climber, always has been, and still is actually. But he would get nervous and you could see he just like overpowered moves that he didn't have to try that hard on. But, people's physiology, as, we discussed earlier, understanding muscle types, I now understand, of course, that he has more fast twitch muscle fiber and he's set up for powerful climbs. He's not an endurance guy, whereas that's the opposite. I am more of an endurance climber and an endurance athlete. I did other sports, before I got into climbing. Like as a kid, I was a swimmer, and in order to win prize money for something that wasn't really climbing related, but I got invited by a famous woman climber named Beverly Johnson, who is one of my role models in Yosemite, and she invited me to this televised competition. And I realized that they had some running events in it. And I was not a runner. I was a rock climber. Rock climbers don't do anything but hike. I mean, we put packs on our back and hike up hills, but it's a lot different than running. So I, learned about running and how to train, for endurance and how to peak before a competition and all that kind of stuff. So that was useful. So I put basically all of my skills of climbing for, I think at that point it was 20 some years. And the route that I chose was probably the most famous big wall climb in the world. El Capitan is the biggest formation in Yosemite, and it's right there. You can walk to the base in 20 minutes. So, the tourists will drive down the road and just usually look, or they'll stop and park and walk out into the meadow and use binoculars or just look at the specks of climbers on the wall. For me, growing up, especially in California, Yosemite was always just a special place. It's one of the most beautiful natural wonders that I've seen in the world. And I loved going on camping trips, and, I loved the nature of just being outside and camping. But when I came to Yosemite through that Wawona Tunnel the first time, and just you see El Cap for the first time, it was just mind blowing. It has a great significance in our history, and also just the whole story of the development of the gear and the vision. The Golden Era climbers, that was a big, big thing to try to do a first ascent up that wall, because nobody was able to really rescue them then. I mean, if they got stuck because they were in uncharted territory, like maybe they got stuck and they couldn't get back down, or, who's going to rescue them? Maybe the handful of climbers that were their friends were the only people that could conceivably rescue them. But fortunately, climbers are very inventive, and they've found ways of managing themselves and bringing the gear up with all the equipment that they had. Sometimes, those hemp ropes that weren't all that good, not like our nice nylon, stretchy ropes. They had to leave a lot of gear on the wall just to get their supplies up, and they figured it out. So I think it's amazing to consider that history. And a lot of the climbers of my generation who were more focused on being able to free climb the big walls or free climb anything. It actually wasn't such a big push to free climb big walls back then, but the nose was an obvious challenge that people would like to do. And, some of the locals like John Backer, Ron Kauk, even European climbers came over to try to do it. Many people tried to free climb the nose but couldn't do it. It's intimidating. And so I think it's very psychological as well, because, it's different if you go to a 100, 200-foot cliff versus, something that's 3,000 feet. It starts feeling, much different for a challenge. And so I feel like I was also fortunate that I was able to focus on climbing as my full-time, career, so to speak, but passion more than anything. And you have to have the time and the willingness to put a lot of work into it, and also not succeed. And you have to be willing to accept that too. And if I had gone into this project saying, I must do it, I probably wouldn't have been successful. My approach was, I'm going to try my hardest. It's a valiant effort. I'm going to do what I can. And it didn't work the first time. I had to come back a second time. I got stopped at the changing corners. I didn't realize how hard that was going to be. And I went away from the valley. I went to, Idaho, where my mom and her husband had a place, and had a little vacation. I thought, you know what? That pitch is going to go free. I know it's got to. So I called my friend Brooke Sandel, who had put some time into figuring out that key section. And he found a variation that, you can do a variation on that pitch. It goes to the left of the corner. But I figured this corner should have the angles and the opposition possibilities. And I was right. It did. And actually, I'm unusually small. I've been shrinking a little bit. I never made it to 5'2", but I'm now about 5'1". And so a person that's 5'1", can fit inside the corner and basically use the pin scars. If you're taller, most normal sized people can use the arete and put their feet on the other side of the wall, which is at a weird angle, so it feels very slippery. You can't really push like flat against a wall, so you have to really be careful about how you place your feet. But in any case, when people said that, oh, Lenny could do it because she had such small fingers, they were referring to the crack underneath the great roof, which is thin. True. But if you're small, you can't reach as far. It's really awkward when you have something that's underneath a roof that you have to have your feet against the face in front of you, and you're pulling out almost more than anything else on these little tiny openings in the crack. So being small or being tall, you have to find your own way. And so it's not what your body size is that's going to determine it. It's how creative you are in being able to use your body in the best way.